My name is Andrei Bondarev. I'm senior counselor of the Russian embassy in the United States. It's an honor for me to represent Russia at the Arctic Encounter Conference. We invariably regard the Arctic as a territory of peace, constructive interaction, and good neighborliness. We consistently promote a positive, unifying Arctic agenda for the sake of finding effective solutions to problems confronting our joint region. And the territory is open for cooperation based on principles of international law. There can be many areas of cooperation, and first and foremost between the coastal states. And our mission in the embassy is challenging, but it remains unchanged. We're trying to stabilize our bilateral relations. Russia is the third closest neighbor to the United States. Our trans-Pacific ties doesn't have any pills, so-called poison pills, that affect our relations in the Atlantic region. And there is a high demand for finding opportunities to continue constructive cooperation in Russia. Currently, it's subnational relations between the Russian regions and United States, states of the United States, cultural, scientific, and humanitarian exchanges, and the Arctic. The far north is perhaps one of those few settings where the Russian Federation and the United States currently cooperate on a wide variety of issues. Examples: for the last years, the United States and the Russian Federation worked together with other Arctic nations to negotiate and sign a binding research agreement to facilitate conduct research in the Arctic. New prospects for cooperation are opening up after the International Maritime Organization last May approved a joint Russian-American proposal to establish 6 two-way routes and 6 precautionary areas for safe movement through the Bering Strait. And this is the first internationally recognized measure of regulation of navigation adopted at the IMO. The two nations signed a multilateral international agreement banning fishing in the Central Arctic Ocean. This document provides pathways for joint scientific efforts to study fish stocks under the shrinking ice cap, and one of the first meetings of the scientific experts of both countries took place just recently, 2 weeks ago, in the city of Archangels with the representatives of the Department of State as well. And the jewel of our bilateral cooperation is interaction between our coast guards and specifically with the 17th District of the United States Coast Guard. It combines a big variety of issues such as oil spills, search and rescue, combating illegal, unregulated, and unreporting fishing. The results are feasible. IAU activities dropped for the recent years. Last October, at the meeting in Juna, a bilateral meeting between the heads of the coast guards of the district, Kamchatka district and 17th district, parties agreed to new continued bilateral efforts for the nearest future. There is even an agreement in place maybe to renew the visits of the cutters, coast guards cutters to the countries. The Arctic Coast Guard Forum brings all 8 nations closer together. And Russia is currently the chairman of the North Pacific Coast Guard Forum, the meeting of the 6 nations that includes China, Japan, Korea, and Canada as well, just took place in Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk, and the next meeting will be held in Vladivostok late September, and we'll end up with a document that will provide basis for the future cooperation in this area. And 42nd meeting of Group for Bilateral Planning for Oil Spill Emergencies Prevention in the Bering and Chukchi Seas took place last November. This is a short and far from comprehensive list of bilateral efforts. Unfortunately, this list is not considered as newsworthy by the mainstream media, but in today's reality, it's a positive record of common ground, common interest, consistent communication, and engaged dialogue. So our overarching goal is to maintain Arctic as a peaceful region, exemplified by broad cooperation among the Arctic states, and we hope that it will be a foundation for inching closer to a more productive relationship elsewhere in the world. So, how can the Russian-American relationship move forward with enhanced cooperation in the Arctic affairs? The basis is the geographic proximity, as well as similarities of natural conditions and economic priorities. We see enormous unused potential for cooperation, and possible areas they were mentioned by the both representatives of the state of Alaska and by our region first and foremost. The list, the list is long, and they include areas, and there is a place for business, for cooperation in the areas like energy supply opportunities in remote areas. That means delivering energy to the remote areas, energy efficiency improvement, exchanging experience in building houses with thermal insulation, mini hotel construction technologies, effective development of clean water resources, safety of navigation in the Bering Strait, development of air cargo connections with access to the markets of Central Asia and the Middle East through the territory of Russia, promotion of tourism as development of tourism opportunities, first aid in remote areas, solution to the shortage of well-educated doctors in rural and remote areas, in education area, establishing direct contacts and links between the Far Eastern Federal University and the universities of the Russian Far East and the North, and University of Alaska, academic and university exchanges, and last but not the least, strengthening cultural ties between the indigenous communities that border our shared Bering and Chukchi seas. So Arctic Council remains the key venue where 8 Arctic nations are free to fulfill their politics-free interaction. Arctic Council has a very rich and attractive cultural diplomatic dialogue and a culture of addressing problems through a search of mutually acceptable solution. And we wish it were a pattern for other international fora. We are confident that there is no potential for conflict in the Arctic, and none of the issues call for military solution, and we're in favor of resuming a full-scale military and political dialogue between the Arctic states. It is a way to promote confidence and mutual understanding and prevent any type of escalation. Annual meetings of chiefs of general staffs from the Arctic Council countries were an effective mechanism for maintaining regional stability. Regrettably, they have been frozen since 2014, but as a first step, we suggest establishing contacts at the level of military experts from the Arctic states. So, addressing practical Arctic maritime issues, enhancing collaborative research, and linking our two nations to the economic opportunities in the Arctic have merit. This cooperation might provide a foundation upon which both sides can regain some trust and positive momentum in their bilateral relationship. In these difficult times, we also need to find ways to more effectively share the positive stories of the Russian-American relations to the general public. When I was preparing these remarks prior to when I was in Seattle, I understand that it's worth mentioning that I used to work here for 4 years in the Consulate General in the Russian Federation in Seattle, and we were taking care of our bilateral relations through the Pacific Ocean. And what we saw that, unfortunately, since the year of the 90s, which was called by someone as the era of the golden age of our relations, after that, the relations wane in some way. We still have anchors of bilateral cooperation, like Microsoft company, like Boeing, that are based here in Seattle. But after that, what we saw, it was a decline of the ties. Some of the connections that were established in the 90s were forgotten or were in decline, and we would like to change this trend because, as I remember, the former ambassador of the United States to the Russian Federation, John Byerly, said once that our, unfortunately, connections and development ties between the West Coast and the Russian Far East unfortunately a lost opportunity for bilateral relations, and this is why we don't want this story to repeat again for our Arctic interaction. Yesterday there was a big event, and there was a specific date for Russia because April 25th. It's everybody who knows the history of World War II knows that this is the day when the meeting between Soviet and American troops happened in Berlin, happened in the city close to the city of Targau, the so-called meeting of Elba. And yesterday there was a wreath-laying ceremony in Washington, D.C., where officials from both countries and many countries, AES countries, who participated in World War II participated. It was in the Mall and Arlington Cemetery, and the whole internet is currently filled with Russian domain of internet is filled with the expression of United States Ambassador to Moscow John Huntsman that dialogue between United States and Russia, political dialogue, is very important. So we feel that many bilateral matters that are currently perceived under the pressure of domestic situation, and we hope that things, when things get back to normal, prospects will open for cooperation, including bilateral, and they will include big issues like fighting terrorism, epidemics, arms control, environment, etc. Thank you for your attention.